Yeah, I think that this person clearly has been in the space of online fitness conversations over the past few years because this is something that's been a topic of conversation. And so I think that we would come at this question from two different angles. With respect to strength as it relates to your general life function, as it relates to healthy aging, as it relates to a maximum squat performance, if you wanted to be a competitive strength sport barbell athlete like a powerlifter, I don't think you're missing out on a ton by not doing leg extensions or sissy squats. If your goal is oriented around absolute maximum hypertrophy for the quadriceps muscles to include the rectus femoris, then I would be in favor of you including that particular exercise. And the reasons why have to do with some anatomy and some biomechanics around the different quadriceps muscles, where they originate, where they attach, and how they act, and how they behave differently in these two different types of movements, like squatting and one legged work versus something like a leg extension or a sissy squat. And it has to do with the fact that the rectus femoris is what's known as a biarticular muscle, meaning that the rectus femoris crosses two joints. It crosses both the hip joint and it crosses the knee joint. So it can participate in active hip flexion. For example, if you are doing, say, a hanging leg raise or something like that, that's a movement where your rectus femoris is actually going to be involved to some extent, active hip flexion. And it's also involved in knee extension, like when you're standing up out of the bottom of a squat or indeed during a leg extension. Since during a squat and a single leg work, like a split squat, for example, you have the simultaneous flexion of the hip and extension of the knee, the rectus femoris actually doesn't do a ton or doesn't receive a ton of stimulus for hypertrophy in that context, as compared with during a leg extension where the hip is not really moving, the hip is not flexing or extending, but the knees are extending. And so the rectus femoris are in a position to contribute to a more significant degree to that action. And so if I were to predict, you may feel differently about this. If I were to predict hypertrophy outcomes, if I were able to measure them to a super granular degree in somebody whose training is set up really favorably, and I had a good study with enough power to determine these kind of differences between people, then I would expect that somebody who trains intelligently using exercises like a progressively loaded leg extension would actually experience a greater degree of muscle hypertrophy of the rectus femoris compared with somebody who exclusively relied on squatting, even if it is full depth squatting. And this has actually been studied